What we're going to do is we're going to walk all 7 tunnels. So almost half of the tunnels were all up here within 2 miles. The reason they built the tunnels is because the tunnels themselves were easier to build, even though they took a long period of time, than to try to come through this area and blast the side of the rock away and to build it out on. And it also gave an opportunity where they had X amount of miles that they didn't have to worry about snow. So this is tunnel number 6. One thing you need to notice as we look at tunnel number 6, here is the original floor of tunnel number 6, right up here. Okay, so over the years, as the railroads have grown, and the stock itself, when I mention stock, I'm talking about the railroad trains themselves, as the stock itself increased in size and increased in everything in height, what they had to do was, in most cases, with the exception of this tunnel, they raised the roof. This is one of the few tunnels that they actually lowered the tunnel. They found it easier to lower the tunnel for whatever reason the engineers decided. So you can see how much they have lowered the tunnel in the last 100 and some odd years. Now, one of the problems that this is not being used today is because this tunnel still is not high enough to handle the freight cars that we have with the double stackers. There has been talk over the years that they're going to reactivate the line, they're going to put it back into effect, but so far that's not necessarily true. Tunnel number 6 is 1,659 foot long. It took 18 months to build. They started digging the tunnel and they got, in 1865, the snows came in, so they had to quit. The general manager of it was a guy named Strobridge. Strobridge was the one in charge of it. The individual who built the tunnel was an engineer named Clement. When he built the tunnel, I'm going to talk about it a little bit more, which is kind of a fascinating story. But so the next year what they did is they actually had the Chinese stay up here all winter, for 2 winters. So the Chinese actually lived up here in the snow. The tunnel was deep enough at that time that they could actually set their camps up inside the tunnel. Now imagine this, the Chinese are working 3 shifts, they're working 24/6, they got Sundays off. They're working 24/6, they're living in here in the tunnels, there's 3 shifts and there's blasting. So I'm sure they got a lot of real interesting, nice sleep over 18 months. So it's kind of a, you know, you got to kind of give them a lot of credit on all of this sort of stuff, their ability to be able to do this. So as they were digging the tunnel, we're going to, what we're going to do is we're going to go through the tunnel and we're going to stop in the middle of the tunnel. And we're going to see quite an unusual little sight. So this is tunnel number 6, the Summit Tunnel. This held the railroad up for 2 years. Union Pacific is beating its way across the country, just laying track to beat the bands, and Crocker is stuck up here at tunnel number 6. Now here's the fascinating story. They had built a road around here called the Dutch Flats Donner Lake Toll Road. The Dutch Flats Donner Lake Toll Road was to support the railroad and bring goods into Truckee down to Reno. Because Washoe was going on. They needed to feed the people at Washoe in Virginia City. When I say Washoe, we're talking about the silver rush up at BC at the Comstock. So they were bringing goods down via the toll road. But also what they were doing is they were bringing machinery up to Truckee, so that then they could start building from Truckee down the canyon while they were stuck up here at the summit. So a guy named Nick of the Woods. Nick of the Woods was a teamster, and during the winter on sleighs, he brought 3 locomotives, all of the cars, and all of the track to build the railroad from Truckee down to Reno, or the California state line. Now imagine bringing 3 disassembled engines, complete engines, steam engines, up a toll road, which was basically with mules. Most of the mules, he was using mules that were anywhere from 20 to 30 mules. And he brought them all up on sleighs in the wintertime because the wagons wouldn't be able to hold them. So what they did is they built sleighs, and Nick of the Woods brought them all up via sleighs. I don't know how many trips he made, but it's an incredible little venture.
They actually claim that nobody else could have done it. They say that it was such an amazing feat that he was able to do that. Jim's going to talk a little bit about the nitroglycerin versus black powder. Oh, you are? You are going to talk about it? Oh, okay. Well, this construction project was very fascinating because this was the last major project in the world that was built with essentially hand labor and old-fashioned animals and stuff like that, rather than modern machinery. After this was built from then on, modern machinery was used. And if it wasn't for the Chinese, this wouldn't have happened. They were using black powder. The Chinese, they used to, particularly building this portion of it where they had to, well, down lower where they had to get into some of the cliffs, they would lower a Chinese on a basket, and they would have to pound into the granite, and then they'd lay the powder in there. They'd light the fuse of powder, and then they'd have to pull a basket of the Chinese up. Sometimes they didn't make it. We have no idea how many Chinese were killed on this one. They didn't keep records of the Chinese. Then in about late 1850s, Nobel, you've heard of the Nobel Prize, discovered that nitroglycerin was far more effective as an explosive than the black powder that's being used. And so he hadn't yet invented dynamite, which actually uses nitroglycerin, but it's combined with sawdust so that it's not as unstable. But they did decide that they were going to try, because it's taken so long to do all the black powder blasting through here, that they were going to try to use nitroglycerin. And they tried it on this tunnel. That was their only tunnel that they actually tried to do it, because it was so unstable and they were losing too many people when it was exploding. They actually brought the chemist up here to mix the glycerin and the sulfur and the nitrogen to make the nitroglycerin, to put it together. And even so, it was very effective at blowing things up much faster, and it also made the rocks in much smaller pieces, so it's easier to excavate them out. But